Okay, so let's continue our discussion on perception and attribution. Okay, so let's proceed to person perception, making judgment about others. O yung tinatawag na attribution theory. Okay, so non-living objects such as desks, machines, buildings are subject to the laws of nature, but they have no beliefs, motives, or intentions. People do. People have the beliefs, motives, and intentions. So when we observe people, we attempt to explain their behavior, and our perception and judgment of a person's actions are influenced by the assumptions we make about that person's state of mind. So we call this attribution theory. So this theory tries to explain the ways we judge people differently depending on the meaning we attribute to a behavior. So for instance, consider what you think when people smile at you. Do you think they are cooperative, exploitative, or competitive? So sometimes we assign meaning to smiles and other expressions in many different ways. So this is what we are going to explain here in attribution theory. So attribution theory is being defined as it happens when individuals observe behavior, they attempt to determine whether that behavior is externally or internally caused. So this theory suggests that when we observe an individual's behavior, we attempt to determine whether it was internally or externally caused. And there are three factors that determines whether a certain behavior is internally or externally attributed. So we have here distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. So let's clarify the differences between internal and external causation. Then we're going to discuss the determining factors. So when we say internally, internally caused, ang ibig sabihin niyan is internally caused behaviors are those an observer believes to be under the personal behavioral control of another individual. So pag sinasabi naman natin externally caused behavior, this happens or this is what we imagine the situation is what we mean pag sinasabi natin externally caused behavior is what we imagine the situation force the individual to do. So ibig sabihin yan, there are factors beyond his or her own control kaya ganun yung naging behavior niya. Okay? Example, if an employee is late for work, you might attribute that to his overnight partying or subsequent oversleeping. So, ang tawag doon is, that is an internal attribution. Ha? Remember. But if you attribute it, yung kanyang pagiging late to a traffic, you are making an external attribution. Okay? So, pag titignan mo kasi yung mga behavior natin minsan can be attributed to internal and external factors. So let's look into these three components para ma-determine natin if a certain behavior is internally or externally attributed. So we have here distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Pag sinasabi natin distinctiveness refers to whether an individual displays different behaviors in different situations. So, for example, is the employee who arrives late today also one who regularly blows off other kinds of commitments? Okay? So, yung distinctiveness. Yung behavior na ba yan, distinct or not distinct? So what we want to know is whether the behavior is unusual. So if it is unusual, we are likely to give in or to attribute it to external causes. Kasi for example, tatla lang. Ngayon lang naman nangyari sa kanya. Very distinct, very unusual on his part. So what we could generalize here is, it is externally attributed. So pero kapag hindi naman siya distinct at hindi siya unusual, ibig sabihin niyan is this is the usual behavior that he or she displays. So we could probably judge that the behavior is to be internally attributed. Okay, so yun yung distinctiveness. Pag high yung distinctiveness, we could say that it is externally attributed. But if it's low, yung distinctiveness is low, we internally attribute it. Next is yung consensus. Is the extent to which peers in the same situation behave the same way. So if everyone faces a similar situation and responds in the same way, we could say that the behavior shows consensus. So ibig sabihin yan, hindi lang siya yung nakakapag-display ng ganyang behavior. So let's go back to the example ng pagiging tardy. So the behavior of our tardy employee meets the criterion if all employees who took the same route were also late. So hindi lang siya yung na-late. Meron ding other individual, other workmates. So therefore, from the attribution perspective, if the consensus is high, marami ang nag-exhibit ng ganyang behavior, we would probably give an external attribution to the tardiness of the employee. Whereas, if other employees who took the same route, yung the same ruta nila na pumunta sa trabaho, made it to work on time. So, on time silang pumasok. Siya lang naman yung nalit, pare-pareho naman sila ng route. Pare-pareho naman sila ng, for example, way of commuting. So, kapag mababa yung consensus, we could attribute it to internal cause, yung pagiging late niya, yung tardy niya, internal cause yung reason ng behavior na yan. So, in summary, if consensus is high, we could attribute it to external attribution. If the cause or if the consensus is low, so we could say that it is internally caused. And finally, okay, the observer will also look for consistency. The consistency in a person's actions. So, does the person respond the same way over time? So, titignan natin kung gaano ka-consistent yung behavior niya for a period of time. Example, dun sa pagiging late naman. Coming in 10 minutes late for work is not perceived the same for an employee who is late 3 times a week. Okay, kung for example, ikaw na late ka ng 10 minutes lang for one time in a week, compared dun sa nalilate in employee for several months na nalilate 3 times a week. So, looking into the consistency of the behavior, the more consistent the behavior, the more we are inclined to attribute it to internal causes. So, pag mataas yung level of consistency, internal attribution yan. So, pag low naman yung level of consistency, externally attributed yan. Okay? So, looking into the diagram here, or exhibit here, we could now assess kung kailan masasabi na yung behavior is externally or internally attributed. Okay, so the table summarizes the key elements in attribution theory. So it tells us, for instance, that if employee generally performs at about the same level on related tasks as does on the current level, so mababa ang distinctiveness, and other employees frequently perform differently, better or worse. So ibig sabihin niya na low consensus, and yung performance ni Caitlin on this current task is persistent over time, mataas ang consistency. So we could judge that yung work performance ni Caitlin okay, are internally attributed. Okay, so to give you other example, tignan natin tong example na to. Okay. There is a customer there is a customer complaint about Johnny Bravo. Using the three components of attribution, so for example, dun sa consensus, there are no complaints about other employees. So ibig sabihin yan, si Johnny Bravo lang ang merong na-receive na complaint. The rest, okay, na mga empleyado, walang na-receive na complaint. So low consensus. Pag low consensus, ano ibig sabihin nun? Pag low consensus is high, ano ibig sabihin nun? Pag low consensus, ano ibig sabihin nun? Internal attribution. But we still have other two factors that we have to consider, yung distinctiveness. Johnny has received similar complaints in the past job. Okay? So hindi lang ngayon na naka-receive si Johnny ng complaints from customers. In the previous years, marami nang nare-receive na customer complaints. So pag titignan mo yung distinctiveness, low or high, it's low. Kasi hindi distinct, nakaka-receive na siya ng customer complaint in the past. So hindi na bago sa kanya yan. So pag low distinctiveness, normally, we attribute it to internal cause. And last component, we have here complaints about Johnny have been coming in steadily. So very consistent. Okay, there is a high consistency na nakaka-receive ng complaints si Johnny Bravo. So therefore, we could probably judge that the behavior of Johnny Bravo, okay, stems mainly from internal causes. Okay. Another example. So, for example, Mariah has performed poorly on collections. Let's look into the consensus. Okay. So, other employees are also performing poorly on collections. So, ibig sabihin, high consensus kasi hindi lang si Mariah ang poor in terms of the performance on collections. Okay. So, pag high consensus, anong sagot dyan? Internal or externally attributed. Another, when we look into the distinctiveness of the behavior, Mariah only performed highly on this task. So, ibig sabihin, high distinctiveness. Kasi, ngayon lang siya naging poor sa kanyang trabaho. At dito lang siya poor. Okay? Etong task na lang na collection, naging mababa yung kanyang level of performance. So, pag high distinctiveness, ibig sabihin niya, externally attributed. And then we have here consistency. Most of the time, Mariah handles collections well. So, hindi consistent yung poor performance niya. Ngayon lang naman. Okay, so therefore, we could say that the behavior or the individual behavior of Mariah in terms of poor performance on collections is externally attributed. Okay. So, bakit importante na malaman natin na yung isang behavior ng isang individual inside the organization must be understand whether internal or externally attributed so that we could properly solve the issue o yung kanyang business problem o yung kanyang performance problem. Okay? So under the attribution, there are some errors and biases na ginagamit minsan or that has been involved when we are attributing whether it is internal or external attribution. Number one is yung fundamental attribution error. So the tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors when making judgment about the behavior of others. So this is this happens when we make judgment about the behavior of other people. We somehow underestimate the influence of external factors Tapos, ino-overestimate natin ang influence ng internal or personal factors. Okay? So, this fundamental attribution error can explain why a sales manager attributes the poor performance of yung kanyang mga sales agent to laziness rather than to a competitor's innovative product line. Okay? Tapos, numet ag succeed da, okay? Numet napintas ti performance ti sales agents, i-attribute na gabot mayat mo ti leadership ken managerial skill na. Okay? So individuals and organizations tend to attribute their own successes to internal factors, such as ability or effort, while blaming failure on external factors such as bad luck or difficult coworkers. Meron din tayong tinatawag na self-serving bias. In here, people tend to attribute ambiguous information as relatively flattering, accept positive feedback, and reject negative feedback. So this is called self-serving bias. Okay? So no nag-succeed ka kuma, di trabaho, the organization nyo, you always point it into internal factors. Nalingnak namin, nagagitnak namin, okay? Hanapay, nagbasa na namin ti kastoy, etc. Ngem no, you failed, you weren't able to meet your expected performance and even the goals, you attribute it to external factors. Kasi kastoy, awang din support advisor ko, or awang support manager ko, kurang na tools, okay, nababat sweldo, okay. So, ganun nangyayari minsan inside the organization. We put the blame for failures on external factors. Another is yung selective perception. Okay, so this is one of the shortcuts for judging others. That sometimes it allows us to make accurate perceptions rapidly and provide valid data for making predictions. But makikita natin dito sa selective perception that we only interpret what we see on the basis of our interests, background, experiences, and attitudes. Ang nangyayari kasi dito minsan is kapag meron tayong nakikita mga person, object, or event that stand out, di ba yung sinabi ko kanina na there is increase in the probability that we will perceive it. Na-explain ko in the previous discussion yung ating mga factors that affect selective or how we select stimuli. So when something stand out, mas binibigyan natin ito ng atensyon. Okay? Kasi nga, minsan marami tayong mga nakikita, marami tayong mga stimuli na nare-receive. Since we could not observe everything and use everything na na-receive natin, we selectively perceive things. So we don't choose randomly. We select according to our interests, background, experience, and attitudes. So we only see what we want to see, and sometimes we draw unwarranted conclusions from ambiguous situations. Another shortcuts in judging others is yung halo effect. Okay, when we draw an impression about an individual on the basis of single characteristics such as intelligence, sociability, appearance, or even yung kanyang mga previous behavior, halo effect is being manifested. So the halo effect is easy to demonstrate. If you knew someone, say, for example, gregarious siya, what else would you infer? You would probably say that the person was introverted, di ba? You might assume that the person was loud, happy, or quick-witted, when in fact, gregarious does not include those attributes. Another example, for example, kung may isang na empleyado, kit kanayin nga on time may gubra. Okay? Kung madipay pulos na ladaw, tapos above overtime. Okay? So, team kwati na duman, gaputa masaka, ang above overtime, ang pinaradladaw, we are using now halo effect, gaputa, kasjay, nagagot siguro dito yung, nagagot dito yung empleyado. Okay? Hanapay, dedicated, trabaho na, committed. Okay? Ngayon din gama mo, in reality, nasapa lang mo umay, kasi, nasapa met nga, di pa kilugluganan na, or di pa kilugluganan na, nalado magawawid, so overtime. But when you look into sa kanyang performance evaluation, amit na napintas ti performance na substandard mo, amot na high. Okay, so sometimes nangyayari yan inside the organization. So we should not base our impression sa single characteristic lang in some individual. Okay? Another is yung contrast effect. Evaluation of a person's characteristics that are affected by comparison with other people recently encountered who rank higher or lower on the same characteristics. Okay. Nangyayari to minsan when we judge or evaluate people. Okay, lalo na kapag mayroong mga performance evaluation. Noong muna nga, for example, in variety contest. Okay, for example, Got Talent ko nga. Noong muna nga nag-perform DJ first performer pa lang nagpintas di performance na. Okay? Ma-set nga na nga to di standard. What would happen to the next performers na hang na ma-meet DJ standard din muna. So normally, mas bumaba DJ level of evaluation. Okay? Kasi di muna nag-perform, nag-present, yet hindi na pintas di performance na, tapos biglang nag-perform na nag-exceed na DJ muna. Normally, we rank them higher. Okay? So, parang ganun din yan. So, ang nangyayari kasi sa contrast effect, we don't evaluate a person in isolation. Sometimes, our reaction is influenced by other people we have recently encountered. Another is yung projection and stereotyping. Itong projection naman, attributing one's own characteristics to other people. Okay? So, kasi lang kung ano nasumputak, expect karakbat na nasumput kayo. Kasi lang kung ano shock na manager, nagagatak, go overtime na, I'm expecting that I want you to project also that kind of attitude. Okay? Which is sometimes hindi nangyayari yan. Okay? Meron naman tayong kanya-kanyang preference. So we don't do this sana in judging others. Another is yung stereotyping. People judge another person or the stimuli on the basis of characteristics of the group to which he belongs. So it is a tendency to perceive another as belonging to the same group or category as the former. However, in reality, since individual is different and unique, people have the tendency to act different even though they are part of a certain group. Okay? But sometimes, ang nangyayari kasi sa atin, we have the tendency to generalize or create expectation of a certain stimulus or even a person or object things based on the group to which they belong. Okay? So for example, kung ibagada nga Ilocano ka, Ilocos Norte ka, ibagada nga BBM ka daw siya, makamarcos ka. Okay? But even in reality, you are not. Kaya naman ibagada nga taga-Davao ka, kaya ka maka-Duterte ka or DDS ka. Or na kung masinuportarang ni Duterte, they will now call you as DDS, fanatics. But in reality, hindi naman totoo na ganun yung the way of thinking mo rin and even behaving. Okay, so yun yung mga shortcuts that we are using in judging others. Now, the question is, what are some of the specific applications where perception is applied? Number one is during the employment interview. Okay, so we should avoid perceptual biases. Okay, kapag kayo nagko-conduct ng employment interview so that hindi maging subjective and we will be objective in selecting the best qualified applicant during the interview process. Kasi if you will be using biases and errors, using or biases and errors in perceiving individual, it could affect yung tinatawag natin na quality of hires. Number 2 is yung performance expectations. Timbak tayo hanggang baling mo sa rinti contrast error. We should be aware of stereotyping and even yung tinatawag na halo effect. So we must be objective in performance evaluation and even in setting performance. Hantay mo't na ikabil di man projectionin. Hantay usaran diya. Another application is yung ethnic profiling. So, ibig sabihin niya is that we remove stereotyping. Huwag natin gamitin yung stereotyping na kung saan siya kabilang na grupo. Yun yung gagamitin natin for inquiry, scrutinizing, or investigation. So, tanggalin natin yung ethnic profiling. Number 4, we have here, nasabi ko na, yung performance evaluation. Ano? So, appraisals are often the subjective perceptions of appraiser or another employee's job performance. So, wag natin gamitin yon. Ano? And then lastly, yung employee effort. So, we must be objective in the assessment of individual effort. Okay. Para talaga ma-reward natin kung sino yung mga real performers compared to those sa mga pretenders lang na maganda yung kanilang effort and level of performance. Okay, so how do we manage our own perceptual process? So the first thing that we have to do is to have a high level of self-awareness. So tayo dapat meron tayong high level of self-awareness kasi yung sinabi ko kanina, the more that we know ourselves, the more that we get to understand also others. So a successful manager knows this, and it is or he or she is able to identify when he or she is inappropriately distorting a situation because of such perceptual tendencies. Okay. Number 2, seek information from various sources to confirm or disconfirm personal impressions of a decision situation. Diba? Katulad ng activity natin in the first discussion, kailangan mong mag-seek pa ng additional data or information before you conclude or make a decision or action. Number 3 is yung be empathetic. So that is, we must be able to see the situation as it is perceived by other people. Okay, katulad ng pinakita ko kanina, yung 3 or 4. Okay, na tawag doon, blocks. Okay. Because different people will define the same situation somewhat differently. So a successful manager rises above personal impression to understand problems as seen by other people. So we have to be empathetic, develop our empathy so that we would be able to understand yung perspective ng ibang tao and even understand yung emotions involved doon sa kanilang perception. So number 4 is influence perceptions of other people when they are drawing correct or incomplete impressions of events in the work setting. Okay. So sometimes people act in terms of their perception. So kapag ikaw ay naging manager in the future, okay, so you must have to influence the perception of others so that work events and situations are interpreted as accurately as possible and to the advantage of all concerned. Number 5, i-avoid natin yung mga perceptual distortions and mga shortcuts. Okay, para hindi tayo magkaroon ng mga biases towards viewing people and even situations. Number 6, we have here avoid inappropriate attributions. Nalad doon, masubraan tayo met, DJ pinag-attribute. whether it is internally or externally attributed. So, kapag ikaw ay naging manager, you must be careful to establish the real reason why things happen and avoid quick or inappropriate attributions of casualty. Ang nagapot ay sa mo DJ three concepts sila tayo of attribution, distinctiveness, consistency, and finalize mo DJ good internal or externally attributed. No? You have to find out more details and even information and even proof, okay, na yun talaga ay internally or externally attributed. And then lastly, we have here diversity management program. Yan, napaka-importante ito for organizations na magkaroon ng diversity management programs so that ma-lessen natin yung misunderstanding and miscommunication on perceptual differences. Kasi in these diversity management programs, okay, malalaman nila yung mga backgrounds, cultural information, notions, norms, and even upbringing ng isang group or ng isang tao. So that ma-avoid natin yung misunderstanding, miscommunication, and even yung mga errors and biases. And lastly, know yourself. Okay? Apply the Johari window to know the real self. We will be having Johari window activity in the next coming discussions. So in this way, when we accept comments, feedback, and criticism from other people, we get to know ourselves better. So therefore, if we get to know ourselves better, we minimize perceptual biases on how people perceive us and how you perceive yourself. So we become aware of values of others, beliefs, and even yung mga prejudices ng mga bawat individual. Okay, so yun ang ating discussion on perception and attribution. So if you have questions, do not hesitate to send me a question, or if you want some clarifications, please do so. You could reach me through various modalities. We have Messenger, we have also email, okay, and we have our group chat. Okay, so that's it. That's our discussion on perception and attribution.